Good morning. It's a beautiful morning for solar and green roofs. It's sunny this morning, which is great for solar. It will be raining in a bit, which is great for green roofs. We are thrilled to have this opportunity to present to a really wonderful group of folks about the new New York City local laws 92 and 94 with respect to requiring solar and green roofs on all new roofs in the city. You will be hosted by myself, Rob Crauderueff of Crauderueff and Associates, and Alexis from Cy Paget Rizal, they are a leading environmental law firm here in New York City that has been extremely active around all legislation with respect to the Climate Mobilization Act, local laws 92, 94, 95, 97. And so they'll bring an incredible wealth of knowledge to the table with us. Basic background and ground rules. Everybody, this is a webinar format. Everybody is muted and without video. Questions are to be submitted through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. There will be two opportunities for questions to be answered, one after Alexis provides her presentation and another after mine. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available afterwards. Folks will be provided a link to share as you wish. Before we get started, then we have a set of questions. We want to know a little bit more about who's in the virtual room. So we have a set of questions for everybody to answer, a poll, if you will. So the first question is, what is the primary building type in your company's portfolio? If you own or operate buildings, or if you're an architect or engineer, what's the typical type of building that you work in?
And note that the answers will not be attributed to you specifically. So for some of the questions later on, if there's something that you don't know, then nobody else will know that you don't know it. So it's okay to share that.
The votes are coming in. They are automatically being tallied. Provide 5 more seconds for folks to cast their votes. So the primary, what we have, oh, one more vote coming in. Any last second votes? Okay. So we have a total of 11 or 37% commercial, multifamily is 30%, some institutional, educational, industrial, and some other. So a good mix, mostly commercial, multifamily here joining us today. We have a series of questions so we can understand how folks are approaching this webinar. So the second question, does your company have at least one building in development that you expect will require a solar project or a green roof? Any last votes? So there we go. We have the majority of folks here do have a project in development. A number of folks are still figuring out, and that's probably why a lot of folks are participating in this webinar, because we're going to help to provide some guidance for those of you who aren't sure or who believe you are, but trying to figure out your best approach. Now, one more question. Does your company have at least one roof replacement that you expect will require a solar or green roof? So we spoke about new development. Now let's talk about roof replacement for a minute. Any last votes? Okay, so we do have a handful of folks who are interested, who are believe that they have retrofit projects that will require solar or green roof. Fewer, the focus is on new development, and a number of folks are not sure, right? About 40% are not certain about whether they will need to comply with this law for a retrofit. So we'll help to provide some guidance. Okay, so now let's jump into the first presentation by Alexis to provide us with some guidance for folks who are looking to comply with the new law. Take it away, Alexis.
Great, thanks, Rob, and thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. This is a good time to be learning about new things, especially things that you're required to do by law. So, as Rob noted, I'm an attorney at Sive, Paget, and Roselle, which is a boutique environmental law firm here in New York City. We're focused on everything from permitting and environmental impact review to renewable energy and energy efficiency. We've been meeting with stakeholders and clients to develop creative and sensible solutions to complying with the new buildings laws in New York City, including Local Law 92 and 94. So, as part of the city's effort to meet aggressive carbon emissions reduction targets, the City Council passed the Climate Mobilization Act last year, which is a suite of laws that includes Local Law 92 and 94, as well as the favorite child, Local Law 97, which, as you may know, requires buildings to meet carbon emissions caps starting in 2024. So local laws 92 and 94 are part of a complete package, really demonstrating the city's movement to more buildings, regulations, and energy efficiency. So a quick note about the difference between local law 92 and 94. 94 establishes the basic requirements for solar and green roofs, and 92 adds requirements for smaller residential buildings and defers the compliance deadline for some affordable housing, which we'll talk about in a bit. So the basic requirement, as you see on the slide, is that as of November 15 of last year, all new buildings and alterations of existing buildings where the entire roof deck or roof assembly is being replaced must provide a sustainable roofing zone on 100% of the roof. So there's a few things to unpack there as you think about whether you have to comply and how you do that. So next slide, please. So the first question is, do you have to comply with this law? Does your building fit within these requirements? So as I noted, it applies to all new buildings and existing buildings where the entire roof deck or roof assembly is being replaced. Historic buildings subject to Landmarks Preservation Commission jurisdiction must also apply or comply. The proposed work has to be approved by LPC prior to the DOB permit approval process. So that's something to take a close look at. I have not seen any detailed guidance on how that process will work, but it's very early stages as to how all of this will be implemented specifically. Many types of affordable housing, as I noted earlier, can defer compliance until November 15 of 2024. This list here on the slide, which we won't go through in detail right now, but you can see there are quite a few building types that can receive a deferral. HPD is taking a look at this and will provide more guidance for these types of buildings. Notably, the deferral does not apply to affordable New York buildings or former 421A buildings. So all of you folks still have to comply on the regular schedule for this. DOB has some additional guidance on this. I have the link here in terms of what forms you have to submit demonstrating your compliance with or exemption from local laws 92 and 94 when you go to submit your new building or your alterations applications with DOB. So there is some more information on that from DOB. So once you understand that you kind of fall within the scope of the law, you have to understand what your sustainable roofing zone is. So that really just means the area of the roof that is available for coverage with solar panels and or a green roof, where here a green roof means a growing medium and plantings. The meat of this is in the exemptions from the roofing zone. So really you kind of take all of your roofing space and you whittle it away through these various exemptions. So this is areas of the roof that are not feasible for solar panels or a green roof, and that's kind of setbacks or access areas based on the zoning code, any areas occupied by mechanical equipment, stormwater management systems, terraces, recreational areas, etc. One particular exemption to note, and we'll talk about this in a moment with compliance, is where you have a roof assembly with a slope greater than 17% that would accommodate less than 4 kilowatts of solar electricity capacity. That's about 12 panels. So in that instance, that area of the roof would be exempt. Then there's a catch-all provision where there are site conditions that DOB finds are unfavorable for solar or for a green roof system. So once you get a sense of what area of roof you're talking about that could potentially accommodate solar or a green roof system, you have to then understand how you're going to comply. What are you going to put on there? So the next slide, yeah. So DOB has created this helpful flow chart to figure out, once you know you're covered by the law and once you have the area of your roof that's applicable for some sort of coverage. The threshold question here is what the slope of your roof is. If you have a low slope roof under 17%, and you have a continuous roof area that's greater to or equal to 200 square feet outside of the small residential context, then you have the option of putting in solar or a green roof. If you don't have that contiguous area, then the green roof system is what you would go with. In the high slope roof context on the other side of this table, if you can accommodate 4 kilowatts of solar, then go with solar. Otherwise, again, this is where that exemption kicks in for the high sloped roof where you can't accommodate enough solar. So you kind of work your way through this flow chart to see what your compliance pathway is under the law based on the slope of your roof and the amount of solar that you can accommodate. But then there are a variety of other considerations in terms of what's actually feasible from a practical standpoint, and Rob will talk about how you undertake that assessment once you've understood what your obligations are under the law. So that's the basic framework for the law, but certainly with Local Law 97 now on our plates, anytime you're doing anything to your building, you want to also think about Local Law 97, and certainly in the context of what's happening on your roof and whether you're putting solar panels on. So as I noted, Local Law 97 requires buildings to meet a carbon emissions cap by 2024. So there are certainly compliance benefits to reducing a building's energy use, and in particular to installing and using solar power. So in the context of solar, you receive a reduced emissions coefficient under Local Law 97 from installing solar panels and using that power. So that's power that you're getting from solar panels on your roof that you would otherwise be getting from the grid. And under local law 97, that equates to a low or zero emissions coefficient, which is extremely helpful in meeting your emissions cap under local law 97. So that's a huge benefit to using solar if you need to meet your cap. Another benefit under local law 97 from solar is that you can receive a deduction from your emissions by installing solar. Even if the building does not use the power, there's a mechanism under the law for receiving a deduction of some amount that will be set by regulation. So there's another benefit from installing solar. And then from a practical standpoint, solar panels produce shade and therefore can decrease the energy use in your building. So that's an indirect benefit in the local law 97 context. If you're using less energy, then your attributed emissions will be lower. For a green roof under local law 97, there's no direct benefit or incentive for installing a green roof, but certainly green roofs insulate the building and can reduce the thermal and cooling loads and also decrease your energy use, which is certainly a benefit under 97. So again, there's a variety of factors to consider once you get into the part of the analysis where you're thinking about does solar or a green roof make sense. And in the context of local law 97, there's a lot to think about and a lot to price out. One final factor, and also kind of another unknown under local law 97, is the potential for emissions trading. The mayor's office under local law 97 must analyze the availability of an emissions trading scheme by January of 2021, such that even if your building is under the 2024 or 2030 cap, you may be able to trade the amount that you are under within your portfolio or citywide. So in the case of solar, your building may not need whatever reductions related to installing solar to meet the caps. But if you can trade the emission savings, then solar might make much more sense, even if you don't technically need it immediately from a local law 97 standpoint. So that's kind of another more long-term factor to consider when you're thinking about whether solar or a green roof makes sense. So that's really the basic framework of the law and considerations under the actual text of the laws. So we can take a break here because I've been talking a lot, and if anybody has any questions on this part so far, feel free to add those questions to the Q&A section, and we can take them now. Otherwise, we'll have some time at the end before Rob gets into his presentation.
Okay, Alexis, thank you. That's a fantastic overview.
Thanks, Rob.
We have a couple questions that have come in. One question from Shino Tanakawa, hi Shino, is how is recreational defined, and can property owners use this exemption to circumvent the requirement?
Sure. So let me just pull up the exact language here. So the language is that it's recreational spaces that are integral to the principal use of the building on which the rooftop is located. That includes spaces like playgrounds, sports facilities, passive recreation spaces, roof terraces, etc., as long as they're documented in the certificate of occupancy or DOB approved filings.
Yeah.
So it can be quite a bit of space depending on the type of building you have and what you've got up there.
And if I may add, then I'm doubtful it would be used to circumvent the requirement, because all of those recreational uses have expenses associated with them. It needs to be accessible. There's going to need to be an elevator up to the roof. So these are really, as Alexis was saying, these are part of the building's function. And I would be surprised to see property owners building a terrace or another form of active recreation without actually, with the primary intent of not having to put solar or green roof on there.
So we're getting in a lot of questions. Some of these questions Rob will go into in terms of the ownership structure for the panels and the kind of structural capacity of your roof for panels or a green roof. The law is very sparse in terms of that level of detail. That really gets more into kind of your feasibility assessment or what's practical based on your roof. There's also a couple questions here.
Jump in.
Sorry,
One more question that's come in a couple times before moving forwards that I think is an important one to address now.
Mm-hmm.
What is the trigger for a roof replacement requiring a solar or a green roof? One question is they don't know whether a routine roofing replacement will be deemed the entire existing roof deck or roof assembly. William McCracken. And we have another question, Zach Speed, is there no minimum square foot requirement other than 200 square foot clear area? How is the entire roof deck or assembly defined? I have a building with a wood sheathing and I remove and replace. Does this count as an entire replacement and trigger the requirement?
Well, the language is in the entire roof deck or roof assembly. I think if there's questions about what that means at a more specific level, there would be kind of a case to be made to DOB, but you have to, in order for DOB to process your application for a new building or a roof alteration, you have to submit a form demonstrating compliance with the laws or an exemption from the law. So you would have to make your case in that instance. It's not kind of a situation where where there's some sort of post work enforcement. In order to move through the DOB process, you have to submit the form up front. So that's where you would work out those kinds of questions.
Generally speaking, if you're simply replacing the roof membrane, then that is not going to trigger the law.
Right.
However, when you get into the full roof assembly with the insulation, and especially if you're touching the roof deck itself as part of a broader rehabilitation project, then you're certainly triggering the law. So, as Alexis said, it's part of if you're having to go to DOB and apply for a roof improvement, then you're likely triggering local law 92 and 94. If you're simply adding a roof membrane and it's a much more basic improvement to the roof, then you're not going to need to comply. So without further ado, there are a number of other questions here. Many of them will be answered during my section of the presentation. So if they are not, if those questions are not asked, feel free to ping again. But let's move into some of the strategic opportunities and economics around how solar and green roof can help to add value to your portfolio in various ways. Thanks again, Alexis. So the focus from our perspective is around strategy for local laws 92 and 94. We work with developers and property owners, the primary concern on a day-to-day basis is how to optimize economic returns. So we will focus on those aspects. Certainly the opportunity to create additional community benefits where it's feasible and practical as part of the project, we want to consider as well. So those are the two main areas of focus. Before jumping in, however, and a little bit more about us, my firm is a New York City-based solar and green roof consulting company here in the city. We focus on owners' representation so that whatever the best economic opportunity is for your building, your portfolio, and your community can be advanced. Let it be a solar of a cash purchase, there's a third-party power purchase agreement model, or a green roof is preferable, then we can help you in all those areas. We are really system agnostic. We've been pioneering green roofs and solar for decades at this point, and it's very exciting for us to see that the two technologies are now being seen in a more systems-based approach to optimize roof space. And our team is working across the city with property owners. So the strategies that we're going to recommend are based on our direct experience in developing projects. The basic method is we put together a decision tree to think through what's the best way to utilize rooftop space. The first question, of course, as has been asked many times, does my new roof trigger local laws 92 or 94? If no, then the project can be advanced based on the standard merits of a project. If so, and this is the focus of this talk, then the first step is to define that sustainable roof zone, as Alexis was laying out. Once that zone is defined, and we generally work with a project architect to help to define that space. If it's a retrofit project, then we can work with you directly. Then the question is solar shaded out for the entire roof? There are two different ways this can happen. One, if there are a lot of obstructions or bulkheads, we'll develop a 3D model of the roof and use very sophisticated software to determine what is the impact of shading. The other possibility is that there are surrounding buildings in the area that will cast shade on the roof. We'll take a look at that as well. If solar is shaded out, then we rule out that technology and a green roof system should be developed. The caveat being you need the structural capacity. If the building cannot support the green roof, you need generally 15 to 20 pounds minimum per square foot to develop a green roof on a building. If that is not feasible, then you're going to be exempt and we need to file to DOB to prove that exemption. If solar is not shaded out for the entire roof, then we need to have a rational approach and take a cost-benefit analysis approach to the project. We'll focus the rest of the presentation on the cost-benefit component. However, it's worth noting that once we complete the cost-benefit analysis, that's when we go into design development. We look at different ways to optimize the value of a project in terms of least cost and greatest returns. We bid work out, help to select a contractor, and administer the construction of the project to make sure everything is built to spec and to keep the project running on time and within budget. So here is a standard cost-benefit comparison of a green roof versus solar. Solar PV has very strong city, state, and federal incentives, as well as the opportunity to avoid electric costs. This is Local Law 97 benefits of selling credits notwithstanding, because those are the opportunity to monetize that isn't yet in place. Typically, we see returns above 10% for solar projects in a 3 to 8 year payback for market rate projects. If you are not able to come out of pocket or you don't want to come out of pocket, then there are no cost solutions. Third-party finance, power purchase agreements, community solar. One of the questions is whether third-party finance approaches qualify to meet the laws, and the answer is yes, they do. In terms of green roofs, then you can reduce the size of the detention tank for new construction, at least double the lifespan of the roof as well. This is very well documented because the expansion and contraction of a roof and direct solar radiation is reduced and prevented. There's also the opportunities for more qualitative benefits like educational space, amenity space. There are some incentive programs. There are niche grant and property tax abatement programs that I'll talk about. They are not, however, as broad-based as the solar incentives. So what questions do you need to ask yourself as a property owner? Is there sufficient solar exposure on the entire roof for a solar PV system? Even if part of the roof can get solar, have a solar array developed, there may be other parts that have significant shade, in which case you're going to need to look at a joint solar and green roof system. Can you effectively utilize the incentives that exist? Are you able to, do you have the tax appetite for the investment tax credit? Are you able to take advantage of accelerated depreciation and so on? Also, would you rather have a no-cost solution? Even if you can't afford it, as I was saying, perhaps there are other opportunities that you would prefer. In terms of green roofs, same basic question: are there areas where you really have to put a green roof because of technical limitations? Would the amenity space provide value to tenants? And would a green roof help to advance the mission, let it be an educational institution or a museum or something to that effect? Then a green roof could provide additional value for the project that a solar system just can't. So jumping in in terms of the solar finance, right? This is a presentation focused on the development and real estate community. We won't get too much into design today. We'll certainly answer questions to that effect. There are two basic ways to finance a solar project. It can be out of pocket, or cash purchase, or third-party financed. Let's take a look at the incentives. To develop a project using your own capital, then you're going to want to take advantage of at least many of the following incentives. There's the federal income tax credit, presently worth 26% of the value of a project. It steps down to 22% next year, 10% each year thereafter. However, you can lock in or safe harbor that 26% by putting 5% of the capital costs upfront this year. So there's an opportunity to lock that in, even if your project won't get built for another year or two. There's an accelerated depreciation schedule. The full value of the project can be depreciated the first year. There are also other accelerated depreciation schedules that can really help to increase the present value of a project. Also, and this is very interesting in the context of these local laws where roof improvements are happening anyway, or new roof is getting put on a roof. Roof costs, a certain share of roof costs, can be included in the basis for the federal income tax credit. And this can have a major increase in the return of a project. Those roof costs need to be well documented to prove that you're in compliance with the IRS, but this is a lot of economic value that is frequently left on the table for a lot of projects. At the state level, NYSERDA has a grant program as of right for any solar project getting developed worth 50 cents a watt, give or take 20% the value of a project. That incentive value is doubled for affordable housing. There's also a pre-development grant program NYSERDA runs that's great for portfolio-based work improvements worth up to $200,000. We've secured $400,000 for that program to date, including for our good partners, enterprise community partners. So affordable housing property owners wanting to make portfolio-wide improvements can get a lot of resources into their programs through this targeted initiative of NYSERDA. Lastly, New York City has a property tax abatement worth 20% of the value of a project, minus any grants coming into a deal. And it can include re-roofing expenses. That's set to sunset by the end of this year. However, it's been extended several times through the state legislature. So hopefully it will again be renewed in moving forwards. Other considerations quickly, the billing structure of a project can make a difference. So if you're connecting directly behind the meter and you're net metering the project, then that may have a different compensation schedule. It's really an avoided cost, so whatever you're paying per kilowatt hour that can be offset from solar is going to be the value of solar for your on an ongoing basis. Remote net metering, you can send the electrons directly into the grid, and Con Ed has a different compensation schedule for remote net metering. Depending on the area of the city, This may or may not make sense for you. And there also are community solar arrangements that are of even greater value that we'll discuss in a minute. Lastly, it's worth noting that there's a substantial variability in terms of contractor pricing. We see variability of anywhere from 10 to 30% on a project. So that's why it's very important to have a competitive RFP and have an apples to apples comparison, because otherwise you can wind up paying a premium for a project simply because the power of the marketplace hasn't been leveraged. We work very closely with clients, such as this one here, 2700 Grand Concourse, to make sure that they're getting the best possible deal on the market. Here we see a 45 kilowatt system on a project in the Bronx. We actually connected this one in front of the meter. They had for those of you looking at existing buildings, if you have an old electrical system, you may not want to connect directly to your electrical behind the meter because you could trigger expensive DOB improvements to your electrical systems. So we didn't want to touch their old electrical systems. We connected in front of the meter, and that worked out much better for this particular client. They're able to utilize federal tax credits, city and state incentives, 17% IRR on this deal, 5-year payback period, and a huge variability again in terms of pricing contractors when we bid the job out. Third-party finance. Community solar is really where third-party finance has gone over the last several years, because there's a significant additional credit that Con Ed will provide for having a community solar project where 40% of the power is used at site, 60% is sold off site. The difference can be from 12 cents if you're simply avoiding your cost of electricity to 20 to almost 30 cents per kilowatt hour for a community solar project, to give you an order of magnitude sense. So it's a major difference. The basic structure of community solar, typically there's no cost to a property owner. A third party comes in and will provide the financing, the development capital, and all operation and maintenance. There's a lease structure for the roof, energy bill savings for the property owner. And then, as I was saying, there's energy savings through smaller electric accounts as well that may be sold either on-site for multifamily building or frequently off-site somewhere within New York City, the Con Ed territories. Around affordable housing, then for HPD, they're requiring a 10-year payback period. If a project can get a 10-year payback for solar, then they're required to build a solar. Numbers can look great for ground-up construction. You can fold the solar into the low-income housing tax credit basis, syndicate the investment tax credit through the project. There are some really creative ways to incorporate community solar and affordable housing projects as well, some which are just starting to emerge. At another time, it would be great to have a session specifically on how to leverage community solar for affordable housing. Smart design is important. Competitive RFP is important. There's some expensive systems being built on affordable housing because the incentives can be very good when everything's layered on. There's some opportunities to be a little more efficient in the affordable housing space. Retrofit market's more difficult for affordable housing because there are not typically tax credits coming into a deal. This is where third-party financing, we have a community solar aggregation model that we're advancing let it be existing portfolios. If there's a RAD development that has a cluster of buildings, then we're able to achieve economies of scale and really treat a bundle of projects as one larger deal at the end of the day. For example, with the services for the underserved, we're developing solar on 18 sites, totaling around 390 kilowatts of power. There's no cost to ownership. All capital is coming from us and our partner, Ouya Solar, one of the largest community solar developers in New York State. There's a one-time upfront project management payment to SUS. It's a lease payment that's going to the buildings. It's 10% utility bill credit to properties and tenants. And construction is going to start later this year. So we're very excited about this model that we are working with housing providers citywide to develop. Now let's talk quickly about green roofs. And the baseline savings, you double the roof membrane lifespan for a wall-to-wall project because you're protecting your roof system, avoiding detention tank costs for all new development projects. So these are really your baseline savings. There is a tax abatement that exists, minimum $5.23 per square foot. It could go up to $15 per square foot in certain target areas that the city is still in the process of determining. However, there's $1 million annual limit citywide, pretty small, so you can't necessarily bank on that benefit. Otherwise, we're looking at, for example, amenity space as a huge value add. Our Chief Design Officer, Kathleen Bakewell, designed this project, the Solaire, completed in 2003, a 4,800 square foot green roof project with a beautiful amenity space, one of the early signature green roofs in the city. There's some inaccessible green roofs on this project as well. So there are some learning lessons from projects that have been developed 10, 15 years ago now to apply today. Educational space, we developed the first green roof on an SCA-owned building with the Alfred E. Smith High School. It's been folded into the project's curriculum with Nate White, the teacher there, who's really done an amazing job developing curriculum and even doing testing of different types of solar and green roof on their facilities. So a lot of innovation coming out of some of these educational projects. This was also developed about 10 years ago. Integrated water management, we worked with Hudson companies to secure $500,000 for a project that was really focused on water reuse to be able to irrigate green roofs. So green roofs may be part of a larger system-wide scheme or initiative of a project to utilize water as a resource rather than waste at the building scale. And lastly, there's a least cost approach. A lot of folks here are probably saying, well, I don't want to spend all the money on an expensive bells and whistles system. I work with affordable housing, for example, at 552 Academy up in Northern Manhattan, with the Community League of the Heights, has many extensive green roof sections, for example, that are able to really be the lowest cost possible system. We used the most cost-effective pavers across the project. There are some accessible areas of this project where we also found some cost-saving measures. It's not necessary to have an accessible green roof, though. You don't need to trigger or require a certificate of occupancy for a green roof. You can just put a simple system like this up here on your roof, and then you're in compliance. So to conclude, there are many avenues for generating value for both solar and green roof projects. The economic, social, and physical conditions which may be particular to a project will greatly impact your returns, and a strategic method can help to optimize the benefits of your roof. And at that, we will go to our questions and answers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rob. So we're getting in some good questions. One just quickly here off the bat was whether there's just kind of a general rule of thumb in terms of the magnitude of cost per square foot of a green roof versus solar. Is there any kind of basic, number that you can throw out there, or is it just totally variable?
Per square foot cost. Well, a green roof will generally start at $20 to $25 per square foot. A solar system, if we looked at we'd have to back into a number. Generally, we don't look at dollar per square foot comparisons because there are returns generated for solar. So it's not only the least money that you can spend, but the kind of returns that you get. So we can provide that for you. I mean, if you have a 100 kilowatt system that may be $200,000 out of pocket after New York Sun, then around a $200,000 system. Whereas you may have for 10,000 square feet, $200,000 to $300,000 for your green roof system. So there may be some premium out of pocket for the green roof. The question is whether you're able to generate enough returns for the green roof for it to offset your solar project, to provide more benefits than your solar project.
What are there certain situations where it makes sense to do a hybrid solar green roof situation? Is that common, or? So
there are two ways to think about a hybrid solar green roof. One is using the green roof as the ballast for a solar system. That is possible. It's not going to help you to comply with the law. So it's really an added cost if you want a bell and whistle, if you want bragging rights, or you're really dedicated to achieving the environmental benefits that both solar and green roofs can provide, then by all means, we've done a lot of work investigating those systems. And there are some really great systems that have been out there for several decades, especially in other countries that we can adapt here. Now, What's a more likely scenario is having solar on a portion of the roof and green roof on another portion of the roof, because there's too much shading for putting solar on an entire roof. So, or if you want a recreational area in one space and you want to use green roof to help to comply with the law in those spaces, and the exemption for recreational area won't cover that entire area, then you're going to put green roofs. Going to want to put green roofs in some of those spaces as well. So the answer is there are both some optional ways to fold green roofs in with solar, as well as some ways that it will help you to comply with the local laws.
Right. So we've gotten a couple questions about the status of certain grant programs or tax abatements now that we have these kind of requirements under the law. So do you know if DEP has eliminated the green roof grant program, or
the grant program is
payments?
still around. It is challenging to use that grant program on a new development project because there are very stringent subordination clauses that lenders may not want to participate in, even if you're getting a green roof. Now, maybe because it's code here and it's not optional, maybe there will be a little bit more give from lenders, but DEP is not flexible with their language. So we've found that developers would love to use such a program, it's not easy to participate in. However, for a retrofit project, especially on an institution that may not have any loans against a project or investors into a building, then it can be a good fit. We've worked quite a bit with property owners to that effect. So yes, there are opportunities there still.
Great. We got a couple of questions in about PACE financing. So you can, theoretically use PACE financing for any of these types of projects. That was another law that was passed as part of the Climate Mobilization Act last year, was to start a property assessed clean energy financing program for renewables and energy efficiency retrofits at your building. That the regulations are still being developed for that. They're on track to be released this year, hopefully in the earlier part of this year, although we're, time is marching on, but we will definitely get some more guidance available on that once the regulations are issued and we have some answers. But PACE financing will be available for these types of projects. I don't know, Rob, if you have anything to add about kind of how you would, when PACE financing would make sense for these kinds of projects versus other types of financing.
Right. There are some sources of debt for solar projects that can be structured into a project if you're looking to secure, if you're looking to leverage the deal. So, however, it's really not common. So local law, so being able to use PACE financing is the really the best opportunity, but it's still down the pike, I would say. So financing is still a piece that needs to be figured out.
Gotcha. Let's see. I think you talked about kind of if your roof doesn't have the structural capacity to handle some of this or any other sort of feasibility issues. I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
Questions? Then if you cannot put solar on your roof and the building doesn't have the structural capacity, then you can get an exemption. That's the short of it. Now, solar doesn't need a lot of structural capacity, maybe 2 to 4 pounds per square foot if you're mechanically attaching to the roof. So the structural limitations really, if it's shaded then you need to use a green roof, but you're not able to support a green roof.
Yeah, and it's a question, I guess it would really depend on kind of the sequencing of your design and when you were submitting applications to DOB, and in terms of how much you can or want to design around these kinds of requirements. But if you, the threshold question is, do you have a new roof, or are you kind of replacing the roof? So then the question is, how much of an argument can you make regarding structural capacity if you're redoing your roof and have to comply with the law?
Yeah, some of these are issues that DOB will be seeing for the first time. So we'll learn more as we're going as well. And these are questions that we'll want to be in communication directly with DOB early in the process.
Right.
Exemption.
Right. And I mean, and this is a big picture thought, but the building code, all of these new local laws, the city's kind of emissions and energy efficiency goals are all clearly moving in one direction, and certainly building owners and developers have to do what's best for their business in this moment. But the long-term trends in terms of where the city wants to see buildings are very, very clear, and that's toward more renewable energy and energy efficiency. So, and local law 97 will certainly provide the stick on that as the emissions caps get more and more stringent down the road. So while there may be an inclination to design around some of these local laws in the immediate term, it's really worth thinking about, as you were talking, Rob, how can we turn these requirements into an opportunity? Because down the road, certainly with local law 97 and any other laws the city decides to pass, you want as many ways to make your building efficient and to use renewable energy as possible. So it's worth thinking about whether you can use local law 92 and 94 as an opportunity to get started on some of those actual long-term advantages. Question about whether we foresee any extensions on the implementation based on the current pandemic. I have not heard anything in this context or in the local law 97 context about an extension of time. Although it's very likely, just given the reality that we're all living with, and given that all of the new laws passed as part of the Climate Mobilization Act require regulations, require guidance, and require a whole new infrastructure within DOB to process all of this. So it's possible that we'll see the deadlines pushed out somewhat, but with local laws 92 and 94, this is the current requirement. It was the requirement as of November. So if you're moving forward and you're submitting your new building or your alterations applications to DOB now, then you have to submit the local law 92 and 94 compliance form. So that's just a current requirement at this point.
In terms of O&M for green roof and solar, then green roof, they both have ongoing O&M. They both have contracts that are folded into the initial project. So the green roof contractor will come in and provide a couple years of maintenance, and then after, as part of the initial construction project, then for the lowest maintenance green roof, it's typically required 1 to 2 visits a year. Solar is about the same in terms of frequency. Frequently there's a year or two, up to 5 years of O&M included in a contract. Again, you know, this is something that it's not necessarily a dollars question, because it's a question of how the O&M fits into the broader pro forma. So it's a little difficult to give a number, as opposed to recognizing both are going to have some O&M requirements that need to be considered into the model. And your solar system is going to need a new inverter after, give or take, 10 to 15 years. So that needs to be folded into the project as well, the ongoing O&M.
So one question about when in the permitting process the local law 92, 94 compliance piece happens. So it's when you file certain applications with DOB, you also have to submit a new form certifying your compliance with or exemption from local law 92 or 94. And those applications are applications for a new building, for alterations with horizontal or vertical enlargements, and any post-approval amendments that include a change in scope encompassing new roofs. So in any of those circumstances, at the time that you're submitting those applications to DOB, you also have to submit the new form, as well as some supporting documentation. The link that's in the PowerPoint, and we can also send this information around to registrants afterward, is a DOB bulletin going into some more detail about exactly what DOB is requiring and when for certain information and documentation.
Lastly, there is a comment from Shino about that with the Soil and Water Conservation District here, who's in daily contact with DEP, and it looks like DEP has been looking into whether they should allow the grant program to help projects comply with local laws. So that's a question that needs a little bit of follow-up before moving forward full force on a project such as that. Well, it is 11 o'clock. We'd like to thank everybody on the line for taking the time, for understanding how to comply with these exciting new rules and regulations, especially given the challenging times that we're in. We will be available for additional questions if you'd like to stay on for a couple minutes. Otherwise, we thank you, and our contact information is here. So you may give us a ring or shoot us a line, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. Thank you very much.
We'll also send around an email after this with the recording, the PowerPoint, and some of the additional materials from DOB, and to follow up on any questions that we didn't get to
Absolutely
during the program. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right. Are there any last questions? Go ahead and add something to the chat if you like. Otherwise, we're going to jump off. All right. Well, thank you all. We really appreciate your time. And we will be in touch shortly with follow-up, as Alexis described. Have a wonderful morning.